We say things like, maybe later, perhaps another time, or I'll see you tomorrow. But for some of us, there won't be a tomorrow. Listen as your worst nightmares come to life. These nightmares have become someone's reality. My name is Justin Crowley, and this is The Murder Project. Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 41 of The Murder Project. This week's episode, we are going to be speaking about a case that involves a woman who is currently on death row. This case has been in the news recently as her execution date is approaching. The execution date is April 27th, 2022 of this year, so this woman is definitely on the clock. Now, this case has come up a lot recently in the news, as I said. And what case are we talking about specifically? This is the case of Melissa Lucio versus the state of Texas. There are a lot of things that are in this case I feel like need to be brought to the attention of the people, and that's why I wanted to cover it, especially because it is in the news right now. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get this episode started. This case takes place in the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, or the Valley, more specifically in an area of Texas known as Harlingen, on February 17th, 2007. And the way that it kind of unfolds is that a 911 call comes in, and there is a unresponsive 2-year-old girl at an apartment complex. And so the paramedics arrive at this location, and they state that they found a approximately 2-year-old female lying on the living room floor. She was unresponsive and she was not breathing. And this kind of starts this whole thing in motion where they're trying to figure out, okay, what's going on, what's happening. And they take this 2-year-old, who we later find out her name is Mariah. They take her to the hospital. Once she arrives at the hospital, she is pronounced dead. Now, when they look at the cause of death for this young child, they determine that there is a lot going on here. And it's pretty immediate after Mariah gets to the hospital and is pronounced dead that the police need to be called. One of the things that they mention is that Mariah has visible bruising all over her body. She has bite marks on her. She has bite marks more specifically on her back. She has patches of hair missing. And it's one of those things where when she is getting basically looked over at the hospital, they say, okay, this is a case that needs to be turned into the police. They haven't done an autopsy. They don't know all the details about it, but they do know that law enforcement needs to be involved. So law enforcement is contacted. They start looking into the case. One of the detectives that's looking into it talks to the paramedics, the fire department that shows up on the scene, and they said that while they were at the apartment complex, they did make contact with Mariah's mother, who was later determined to be Melissa Lucio, and she could not really explain what happened to the child to cause the injuries, or what could have happened that caused her to become unresponsive on the floor. And one of the things that they noted in this contact with Melissa is that she seemed a little disconnected or distant, not really helping, not really attending to the child, Mariah, not really grieving, not doing much, just kind of standing off on the side, just watching. Now, I know most of us would think to ourselves, if something was wrong with our child, we would be right there on the spot, in the floor, in the middle of it. And I know that's how I would be as well. But we can't necessarily say that is the case for everyone. Now, one of the things that we need to talk about as far as this case goes is the condition of the home and how the home was situated. One of the things that come up with Melissa is that she was a quote-unquote single mom. She did have a live-in boyfriend that had fathered several of her children. She had been married previously before this, and that previous husband had fathered 5 of her children. So in total, at the time that this whole case is kind of unfolding, she has 12 children in total, and she is pregnant with twins. So some of the things that you might read on this case is that she has 14 kids at the house. I read another report that stated that there were 9 children at the home at the time of the incident. And so some of that gets a little bit confusing. So I think it's safe to say that we know for sure that Melissa had 12 total children born, and she was pregnant with twins. That's what gets us to the number of 14 total. Now, as far as the house goes and the location that Mariah was found, she was found in an apartment complex in a 1 or possibly 2 bedroom apartment. Now, at the time that all this was happening, they were moving into this apartment. They were in the process of moving out of their old apartment. And I know that it has been said that previous to this, for some period of time, they could have been homeless. So they were definitely moving around a lot. They definitely were not in a location that was suitable to house 12 children, the mother, and the live-in boyfriend. We know that for sure. But it's also stated that kind of in this confusion of everything that was kind of going on in the moving, that some of the children were left unoccupied. They were not being watched very carefully. I can only imagine that it is very difficult to try to keep an eye on all of these children at one time. But either way, that is kind of how this incident supposedly kind of unfolded. It was the fact that there was a lot going on, and the children were not being watched, and some sort of accident occurred which caused Mariah to either be injured or to cause her death in some way. Because at this time, we don't know exactly what happened to her specifically. Now, after the autopsy was conducted on Mariah, they found that she also had a broken arm at some point in time that had never been addressed properly. So she was never taken to the doctor. She was never put in a cast, or they never set her arm. They had noticed that the arm had already started to heal after it was broken in the position that it was left in. I did mention that she had the bite marks on her body. She was covered in bug bites. The patches of hair were missing, and kind of just a lot of different things going on. In the autopsy, it also revealed that Mariah had pinch marks to her vaginal area, and she was severely dehydrated. She had contusions to her lungs and kidneys, and she had some sort of blunt force trauma to her head, which caused a brain bleed, and that eventually was her cause of death. The blunt force trauma to the head causing the brain bleed. So when the police find out about all this, it's time to get Melissa and take her into the interrogation room and figure out exactly what has happened. Now, Melissa says originally, as I've stated, that she's not sure how this actually happened. There is some talk about Mariah possibly falling down the stairs at the apartment complex that they had just moved into. One of the children that was at the house also confirmed that he noticed that Mariah had fallen down the stairs, but they thought perhaps she was okay, that she had maybe just got a little hurt, but it was no cause for concern. I know a lot of people are probably screaming right now. That is a huge cause for concern. I agree with you, and we will cover that here in a minute. The same child that said that he saw Mariah fall down the stairs also said that he noticed that later on during the day, or possibly the next day, Mariah was acting like she was extremely tired, which this would also tie into some sort of a head trauma, and that she was not really acting like herself, not really eating a whole lot, which I don't think there was much to eat in that house, which I will also cover, but that he had put her down to take a nap or to go to sleep, and she never woke up. Now, at some point in this process, I did not find the information on this, but I'm going to make an assumption here. At some point after she was put down to go to sleep, somebody noticed that she either didn't wake up or she wasn't breathing, and I guess she was moved to the living room floor, or she was asleep, possibly on a mattress on the living room floor, because we have to remember that this is a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, and there's not going to be a whole lot of space for people to sleep. So somehow she was transported into the living room. That's where the paramedics found her. The mother, Melissa, does not really know how this all happened, is what she's telling the police. The police are kind of telling her that they have noticed that she has bruising on her body, that a lot of different things are not adding up as far as her story goes. Now, Melissa does in this interrogation say that she does discipline her children, that she does hit them if, and I say in the sense of hitting, but she could have possibly mean spanking them. We also have to remember that there are a lot of children in the house, so it would be hard to tell what bruises would possibly be from Melissa and what bruises could possibly be from the other children in the house. As I have stated, she did not say that she kept a watchful eye on them. I know that she was pretty disconnected from her children in general. There has been accusations of her chronic drug use, and specifically cocaine. One of her children said that sometimes she would go into the bathroom and use drugs, and she would be in there for hours. So not really paying attention to what's going on with the kids, and I think that overall is how we get to this situation. Now, originally they thought that, or it was said that, Melissa could have possibly pushed Mariah down the stairs, and that is how she got this injury, and no medical attention was sought, and she ended up dying. Later on, I think they would back off of that because there's no actual evidence to prove that Melissa was the one who pushed Mariah down the stairs, especially after one of the children mentioned that he witnessed her fall down the stairs. And in the interview, when they're talking to the child, they say, "Did someone tell you she fell down the stairs, or did you see her fall down the stairs?" And he says, "No, I saw her fall down the stairs." Now, in the interrogation of Melissa, I have read documents that say she was in a intense interrogation for anywhere between 5 and 7 hours. And I think it's safe to say we can kind of split that maybe in the middle, but I know the police documents showed that she was being interrogated from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. And during this time in the interrogation, she admits to several things that the police feel like they can use as a case against her, and as in the case of Mariah's death. Melissa is originally charged with Mariah's death. I don't know if they went straight for a murder charge, but I do know that she ended up being charged with capital murder for Mariah's death because of everything that kind of had taken place and the evidence that they had at the time. And the reason that we get to the capital murder case, and I know some people might be asking, well, if it's just this one incident, how does it go to capital murder? Well, it's because of a enhancement that this charge carries. So basically what is happening is that if you cause the death of a child under the age of 6, you get an enhancement. And so that enhancement is what makes you eligible to be charged with capital murder. Now, I think one of the things that we need to look at in this case was Melissa actually charged with the correct crime. Now that I kind of gave you a little bit of the backstory about how we got here, I want to kind of talk about and break down a few things regarding the actual charge. So Melissa was charged with capital murder, which carries the death penalty. If you don't go for the death penalty, the only other option is life in prison without the possibility of parole. So when she was charged with this, the DA's office, when they put in the charges against her, what they would basically have to say is that Melissa intentionally, knowingly caused the death of her child. And I think that is one of the topics that we need to talk about, because in the state of Texas, the measures of culpability as far as criminal act goes, what your responsibility is for that criminal act, we've talked about this on the podcast before, but I'm going to explain it again. In the state of Texas, as far as culpability goes to a crime, you have to intentionally, knowingly, recklessly, or negligently cause said crime, whatever that crime might be. In this case, it is the death of Mariah. So if you intentionally, knowingly cause the death of a person, then that is considered murder. If you recklessly cause the death of somebody, that is considered a manslaughter charge. If you negligently cause the death of somebody, that is kind of your criminal negligent homicide type thing. Now, the first is obviously the most severe, and as you go down the scale of culpability, you also go down the scale of the severity of the crime. So they charged Melissa with capital murder, which means that they are saying that she intentionally, knowingly caused the death of her 2-year-old daughter. And one of the ways that they went about that is saying that originally they thought that Melissa may have had a direct hand in the injuries that happened to Mariah, but later on they would go back and state that it was her inaction that caused Mariah's death, that it was obvious that Mariah was injured in some sort of way, and Melissa did not seek out medical attention. She did not call anybody regarding this incident, and she is solely responsible for Mariah's death. I personally feel like that is a little bit of a stretch as far as intentionally, knowingly goes on the scale of culpability, but they went ahead and went with that charge for this case. So when they are looking into this, one of the things that they have to consider is, how did this incident occur? How did it happen? What are the things that they're going to be looking for? Because we know that the incident that happened to Mariah that caused her death was blunt force trauma to the head, which resulted in that brain bleed that I was talking about. And so how would we go about getting an injury like that? And there are several ways that this can happen. But speaking more specifically to this case, I think it's important that we just kind of narrow it down to that, so we're not just speaking in generalities. One of the ways that you can receive blunt force trauma to a person is that a person could strike another person with a limb of their body. Say, for instance, somebody has a mean right hook, they punch somebody in the face, it fractures their skull or whatever, and you have a blunt force trauma. They kick you in the face, you have blunt force trauma. Another way that this could happen is that a person is doing something and they, say, trip and fall, and they make contact with a inanimate object. More specifically, let's say you're walking and you fall down the stairs and you hit your head on the stairs. You, as a person, accidentally tripped, you made contact with an inanimate object, you got blunt force trauma to your head. Another way that this could happen is if, say, someone uses an inanimate object and hits you with it. Take, for instance, a bat is an inanimate object. It cannot hurt you. A bat itself cannot decide that it wants to hit you. But someone can pick up that bat and hit you in the face with it and cause blunt force trauma. So they have to figure out how exactly this blunt force trauma happened to Mariah. And I think what they come to the conclusion of is that Mariah accidentally or unknowingly was pushed down the stairs by someone, and she received this blunt force trauma to her head, and the inaction of her mother is what caused her death. That's what they're going with. When she is charged with this crime, she originally says that she is not guilty. Well, I say originally, but she still says she's not guilty, but she pleads not guilty to the charges, and it is time for her kind of to get set up to go to trial. Now, when we get to the trial, this is kind of when, in my opinion, things get even more hazy. There's a lot of things that happened in the trial that I feel like happened also in that Johnny Frank Garrett case that we did on episode 5, I believe, 4 and 5. It's one of the things that when you're looking at this case, there is a documentary about Melissa. The documentary is called The State of Texas versus Melissa. It is on Hulu, it is on Amazon Prime. There is also a show that is going to come out, I believe, either on Discovery or 2020 or one of those investigative, IDTV. If you're listening to this podcast on the day it actually comes out, then that show will air tonight, on the day that it comes out. So be sure and check that out. I have rented the documentary on Amazon Prime. I have not watched it yet. The reason that I have not watched it yet is I wanted to see what the facts of the case were before I watched the documentary, and then talk about that more specifically in the debrief. Going back to the trial. So this is 2007. The trial takes place the following year in 2008. And from what I understand, this was only about a week-long trial. And that doesn't seem like a very long time considering this is a capital murder case. Also considering that the first day after jury selection has already been done, voir dire has already been conducted, the judge has to issue jury instructions on the first day. Sometimes that can be quite lengthy. And then you're going to go to your opening statements. And so if I was to have to guess the way that this went down after jury instructions, they might have got to start opening statements, which probably would have bled into the second day, if not started until the second day. Then you have closing arguments. So the way I feel like this whole thing went down is that you have really 3 days of actual trial in a capital murder case where someone is then later found guilty of a crime and sentenced to death. That seems like it's way short of a time frame and like it was way rushed. But I'll also explain why that kind of came about. In the trial, basically what you have is you have the district attorney's office. They say that Melissa is responsible for the death of her daughter. They bring in the experts, they bring in the witnesses, they bring in everybody that can basically say that Melissa was a terrible mother, that Mariah had a bunch of bruises on her body, that she had the broken arm, that she kind of had all of these things that were happening to her inside this home. I think it's also important to note that before all of this went down, the children had actually been removed from the home. When Mariah was only 2 weeks old, her and all of the rest of her brothers and sisters were removed from the home by CPS. And it was only 3 months before her death that Mariah and the rest of her siblings had been returned to the care of Melissa. And this kind of separation between the siblings and the mom could kind of explain why really, I don't know if there was a connection with Mariah, because when she was born, they were only 2 weeks into her life whenever she was removed from the home. And so her siblings and the mother, I guess you could say, didn't really get a chance to bond with Mariah or make a bond with her. And this could have led to why she was neglected not only by her mother, but also by her siblings. So it's kind of crazy to me that none of the children are in the household because of a CPS investigation that pretty much explains, and I'll go through, I read through the CPS investigation because it was brought up in the appeals court trial, and it talks a lot about the same things that I've mentioned, that when CPS investigators showed up to the house, and I'm kind of just summarizing here, but when they showed up to the house was in terrible condition. There was a lot of trash inside the house. It was very unkept. There was only kind of mattresses on the floor. The house smelled strongly of urine. All of the kids basically were covered in bug bites. All of the kids, or most of the kids, had bruising on the body. There was a very limited supply of food in the home. And when I say limited, I mean there is not enough food in this house to feed one person for one meal, let alone all of these children, plus the mother and the boyfriend. Melissa would later state that a lot of times she would take the children to a kind of local food bank or soup kitchen area to feed them because they did not have the money to feed the kids. Now, I think some people would point out that the reason they didn't have the money is because of the drug habits and other things that were going on in Melissa's life, but I'm not here to speculate about that. But what I will say is that during that CPS investigation, when they removed the children from the home, I think that that was definitely a good move as far as their case goes, because the kids did not seem like they were being taken care of. It definitely seemed like there was a lot of negligence on Melissa's part as far as taking care of her children goes, and they were rightfully removed from the house. What I don't know is how that order was reversed and the children were given back to Melissa and she regained custody of all of her children. This, of course, as I mentioned, took place 3 months before Mariah's death. So she's around 24 months old whenever she dies. She's taken out of the home at 2 weeks. So there's a pretty extensive period of time where the children are out of the home. And right before all this happens, basically, they are put back into the household. So moving on with the trial, as I mentioned, the DA's office brought in their witnesses and their experts. And then when it came time for Melissa's defense, suddenly there wasn't really much of one. Her attorney did not call any witnesses on her behalf that state that Mariah was not pushed down the stairs by Melissa, that Melissa did not directly cause Mariah's death. Now, I know that we can go back and say, okay, well, she did not call the police or an ambulance either after she noticed she was injured, but that's not what I'm talking about specifically at this point. At this point, what I'm saying is that there were family members in this house that witnessed Mariah falling down the stairs, and that it was not Melissa who pushed Mariah down the stairs, or whatever the narrative that is being spun during this time. There's no witnesses, there's no experts, there's nothing that Melissa's attorney does to try to turn the tables and offer her some sort of defense, whatever that defense might be. And I know that this is extremely hard to think about because we know the condition of the household and the children, and this is all at Melissa's behalf. But everybody's supposed to be offered a fair trial. And in this situation, when her attorney basically does nothing, the district attorney's office is laying down witnesses, they're bringing in people, experts, all of this stuff. Her attorney's basically sitting at the table, clicking his pen, drinking water, waiting for this whole thing to be over. He does not do anything, from what I've read, to help her out in any way, in any sort of defense. At the conclusion of the trial, they find Melissa guilty, and as per the judge's instructions, they are seeking the death penalty in this case, and Melissa is given the death penalty for Mariah's death. After this, after Melissa basically is put on death row, there are some appeals that start taking place, none of which are with her original defense lawyer, because, wouldn't you know, crazy thing, Melissa's defense lawyer ends up, after this, going to work for the same DA's office that was prosecuting Melissa. No lie. And it is later found that also in Melissa's defense, not only was the testimony of the children never sought, but also Melissa's past that kind of gives you a better understanding of who she is as a person. So kind of giving you some of those details, apparently Melissa came from a broken home. There was substance abuse in the home. Melissa stated that she had been sexually assaulted by one of her mother's boyfriends starting at the age of 7 years old, and that the sexual assaults in whatever nature that they occurred in by different men or a single man continued for a extended period of time. So Melissa, at the age of 16, was trying to get out of the house, and so she ended up getting married to an older man, or older than her by some years, at the age of 16, and that man was also physically abusive to her. She had 5 children with this man, and then they separated, and she ended up with another man. Now, I'm not sure exactly if the guy she was with at the time of Mariah's death fathered the remaining children, or if there are other men in between there. But I do know that they stated that after her abuse as a child and her abuse in her first marriage, that she kind of started her own substance abuse issues, and she was kind of disconnected from everything that was going on. And this might have been her way of dealing with the pain and the trauma of her past experiences. And this could have in some way altered her psychological state, the way that she thought about things, the way that she acted about things, her nature versus nurture. All of those things that I think kind of go into a little bit out of my league on that one, but that, personal feelings, the feelings of others, all of these things could have been affected by her past, and maybe that's why we don't kind of see that engagement with her children and the way that she kind of treated her children. I don't know specifically if that's what it was, but I do know that that is one of the theories that they came up with, or one of the things that they brought to her defense after she had already been convicted, because as I stated, her defense was basically zilch whenever she was in trial. And I think that solely falls at the feet of her defense attorney, that he did not actually do anything to help her case. And then the fact that he also went and worked for the DA's office sometime after this case had concluded. There was also talk about the possibility of one of the other children causing the injuries to Mariah. There's a statement from one of the children that there was abuse in the home by some of the other children, kind of like a child-on-child situation, and that could have been how Mariah ended up getting pushed down the stairs. I do know that later on they come back and say that one of the children, I believe her name is Alex, was abusing Mariah specifically and had also pushed her down the stairs. So there's a lot of different things kind of swirling around, and I know some people say after the trial is all said and done, they're like, well, now, okay, we never heard about this in the beginning. And so after she's found guilty, now she's spinning this narrative. Because they talk about Melissa in the beginning of this whole situation trying to protect her kids, saying that yes, that she had spanked her kids, that yes, there's some abuse. Her attorney even stated, we're not going for, Melissa's not up for Mother of the Year award, but there's not really a whole lot of talk about physical abuse from one child to the other. And they feel like Melissa, after she has been convicted of this crime, is sort of pawning off that abuse to the other children so that they would take the fall for it, and that she didn't bring it up in the beginning. But I think this is one of those scenarios where it's kind of hard to see what exactly was brought up in the beginning and what exactly was not, because they have an interview of Melissa at the police station and a few interviews with her children that are available. But it would have been nice to know what her defense was in the beginning so that you can compare it to something later on, but there wasn't one. There's nothing there, so we don't really have anything to compare it to. As we get a little further in the appeals process, there are a lot of things that are brought up on Melissa's behalf. stating that she did not receive adequate counsel and that she did not receive a fair trial. I have to say, in this circumstance, I do agree with that in some levels. And also, the district attorney that prosecuted Melissa and put her on death row. I think it's important to bring up the fact that Melissa is the first Hispanic female to ever be put on death row in the state of Texas. And if her execution is carried out, she would also then be the first Hispanic woman to be executed in the state of Texas. Now, the DA that put her on death row was arrested a few years after this case concluded, and what he was arrested for is apparently taking bribes and also dealing out bribes, taking money from people to kind of favor cases in one way or the other. I do believe this was a federal case, and I do know that he received 14 years in prison, so it had to be somewhat of a serious allegation as far as all that goes for him to receive the 14 years in prison, being a district attorney before all of this went down. So the rest of the DA's office that was in place when the district attorney was arrested was still there after all of this was said and done. He was the only one that was arrested, but if there is corruption going on inside this DA's office, I got to kind of feel like it's not just at one level, that it kind of would have went through there in some sort of layers, but those layers were not uncovered. Now, moving on, in the appeals process, as I mentioned, they said that she did not receive a fair trial. And as this kind of case moves on, it goes to the Fifth Circuit, the U.S. Fifth Circuit Appeals Court. They review the case. Before it gets there, it's basically any appeal that she has gone for has been denied. Her death sentence is upheld. Well, it gets to the Fifth Circuit of Appeals Court, and they agree that Melissa was not given a fair trial, and they say at the very least that should happen, that she should go back on trial, that she should be able to offer a defense for said crime, and let a jury decide again. However, the district attorney's office, the state of Texas, appealed that decision as well, and in the same court, that decision was overturned and she was put back on death row, which seems kind of strange to me that all that unfolded kind of in the same court where she was essentially taken off death row and said that she should get another trial. And then in the next breath, they're like, well, never mind. We're going to go ahead and put her back on death row, and the sentence is upheld. So now kind of Melissa's situation is that she is almost kind of exhausted all of her appeals processes. I do know at this time, the only way that she can be let off death row, if I'm not mistaken, would be by the Texas governor. She also has an appeal going into the U.S. Supreme Court, but we have to remember that the U.S. Supreme Court only hears about 1% of the cases that are brought to them, because they get a lot of cases a year and they can't hear all of them. So the process to get in front of the Supreme Court is extremely hard. Or I believe the Texas Pardon and Paroles might be able to do something to have like a stay of execution or extend the time to figure out if the processes have gone through all the way. But at this point in time, no one is doing anything besides the appeals process, is what I'm trying to say. And so if the U.S. Supreme Court does not hear her case, and the governor or the Pardons and Parole Division do not step in, Melissa is set to be executed on April 27th. Now, there's a lot of things that have gone on in this case that I haven't brought up because, as you guys know, I do a lot of that with Mike in the debrief. That's why we have the episodes. But I do like to give you guys kind of the baseline information. But I think one thing that's important about this case that I kind of want to talk about really quick is that, like her attorney said, Melissa isn't going out for a Mother of the Year award. I don't think anybody that reads about this case or hears about this case believes that Melissa is innocent in every way. Now, there are some people out there that do, but I'll get into that. And what I mean to say is that this case basically goes around the fact that a woman is on death row. And was she fairly put on death row? This is a serious thing. This woman is set to be executed. I don't think that Melissa Lucio, at the time that all this was going on, I don't know who she is as a person now, but at the time that all this was going on, I do not believe that she was a good person. I do not believe that she took care of her kids. I do not believe she was looking out for her kids. I believe there is a lot of evidence that says that she neglected her kids in a lot of different ways. I believe that she abused her kids in several different ways. But what I'm getting to is that enough to get us to death row, to get Melissa to death row? Should she have been convicted of a capital felony that puts her on death row? And based on the information that I've read in here, I would say no. And there's a lot of people that say, okay, well, she was a bad mom. She did not take care of her kids. She abused her kids. She's right where she should be. But hang on, because this is the justice system. There has to be integrity in the justice system. I do believe that the DA's office could have had a 15, 20 count, 30 count indictment of abuse and negligence charges against her that would have put her in prison for a very long time. It doesn't mean that she goes to death row, but it does mean she goes to prison and she is responsible for the crimes that she committed. So some people are turning a blind eye saying, well, she was a terrible person to her kids, so she's right where she should be. Some people are now saying that because she was put on death row and that not all of this adds up, that she is innocent and they want her freed. And this is that kind of predicament you get into whenever you have such a severe punishment carried out on someone who I believe doesn't fit the bill for the death penalty. Because now you have people looking away. Now you have people saying she's innocent, set her free. I think the distinction we need to make here is that should she have been convicted and sentenced to death? No. Should she be in prison for the neglect and abuse to her children? Yes. But because we are fighting a battle of a woman on death row, the sides are divided. And now you're going to have one side say, keep her in jail. You're going to have one side say, set her free. That's why the integrity of these trials has to be upheld. The integrity of law has to be upheld. Because then we get in situations where if she, let's say for instance, she's taken off death row, people are going to say, okay, set her free. And if she is taken off death row and this sentence is overturned, I guarantee you that the DA's office will come back and they will charge her with something else. Now, does that mean that she might not get some sort of time served situation or whatever? I don't know. But I would think that the DA's office is not going to take an L on this one. That they're going to go back and say, okay, well, we only charged her with capital murder. We did not charge her with any of the abuse or negligence of Mariah or the rest of the kids, which they can go back and do if they so choose. This is a lot. I know I say that in a lot of the cases, but there's a lot of information in here that I haven't brought to light because we're going to talk about it in the debrief. Before we get to the debrief, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to watch the documentary in its entirety, The State of Texas versus Melissa, so that we have that to talk about as well. But I want you guys to think about something, and that is, this is a horrible thing. What happened to Mariah should not have happened to any child. What took place in that household, we may not know exactly what took place in that household. But when it comes to using the death penalty, I think it's important that if used correctly. And I don't feel like in this case it was used correctly, and that has opened up the door to a lot of different things. Not only that the integrity of the death penalty can be challenged, but also if Melissa is executed and it is later determined that, well, technically, I guess she doesn't fall under that category, it goes against what capital punishment is supposed to be used for. And I know I'm kind of rambling on about that, but I just think it's really important to talk about that and the way that it's used. I'm not saying that she's innocent, and I'm not saying she's a good mother. But what I'm saying is that we have to use this correctly. So having said all that, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it there for now. Mike and I are going to come back for the part 2 and do the debrief on this, and I will give you I'll kind of fill in the blanks of all the other information that happened in between, kind of at the house, during the trial, during the appeals. I'll go through there and kind of fill in the information as we do. Mike and I will talk about kind of the different things that we have to say as far as this case goes and where it should be at. But if you haven't watched the documentary or look into it, I suggest you look into it, because it's one of those cases where I feel like it meets several different criterias of the justice system. It's a person who is obviously guilty of something, but is she guilty of everything that they say that she is? So I'm going to leave it there for now. I apologize if I was a little bit all over the place on this one. There's a lot of details in it, and I don't like to ruin the debrief, but sometimes I can't help myself. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there for now, and I will talk to you guys on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of The Murder Project. Our downloads are going up, our numbers are going up, and we have you guys to thank for that. If you're looking for us on any of the social media platforms, you can find us on Facebook. We're at The Murder Project. If you need to search for us, type in facebook.com/podcasttmp. If you're looking for us on Instagram, we're at The Murder Project. And if you're looking for us on Twitter, we're at The Murder Pod. Also, if you have any longer form questions or comments, you can reach out to us via email. That email address is contact@themurderproject.com. And we'll get back to you with any questions, comments, concerns that you might have. Don't forget, go to whatever platform you're listening on, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if they have it. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, and hit that 5 stars. We are actually picking up in numbers, and we appreciate it, but we need your guys' help. So thank you to everyone that has done that. I look forward to speaking to everybody soon on the debrief. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. But before I go, please remember, head up, eyes up, stay alive.